What's happening, everybody? Larry Roberts back at you again with another great episode of the Readily Random podcast. You know, I say it every week, and I say it every week, but I really, really mean it this week. I have got a phenomenal guest. His credentials are amazing. And his name is Joe Navarro. Joe worked as an FBI special agent and a supervisor in the areas of counterintelligence and behavioral assessment for 25 years. He's one of the founding members of the FBI's elite behavioral analysis program, and he also served as a SWAT team commander and a bureau pilot. Mr. Navarro is the author of numerous books, including his best-known body language book, What Every Body Is Saying, as well as Dangerous Personalities, which we're hopefully going to talk about today, and his most recent 3 Minutes to Doomsday. Although he's now retired from the FBI, Mr. Navarro now focuses his efforts on speaking and consulting with major corporations worldwide, as well as lecturing at Harvard Business School. Mr. Navarro, thank you for joining me, and all of my Readily Random listeners, welcome to the show.
Larry, it's a pleasure. It really is, and I'm very glad you invited me.
Well, thank you. You know, I took about 30 minutes there for the intro alone, so thank you for showing up, and we'll talk to you next time.
No, you're most kind. As I was listening to you, I was remembering all these things that I've done in my life, and I remember something someone said to me that years back, maybe 40 years ago, who said, you really don't know what you will be doing in your lifetime, but if you're going to do it well. And for some reason, as you were talking, I was thinking about all the things I've done in my life that I never imagined.
Well, now you were fairly successful even from the start. You grew up successful. You attended, was it Brigham Young, where you was an athlete there. Now, what sport was it that you excelled at there at BYU?
Well, Let's qualify that. It all depends on how you measure success. You know, like so many people, I played sports in high school, and I went to high school in the Miami area, and there was a scout there from Brigham Young University that had attended a couple of the games, and he suggested sending out some tapes to BYU, where at the time Lavelle Edwards was the famous coach was taking over, and so they had an interest in me. Unfortunately, in my senior year in high school, I was working at a store, and the store was robbed, and in the process of the robbery, I went to stop them, and I was stabbed, and that was right before I graduated. So it was probably April, May, and that time frame. And then they wanted me at BYU by August, September. But when I got to BYU, I was nursing my arm. I still had about 60 stitches of an original 180. And so my career at BYU, I think on the field, I lasted about 8 minutes, and then it was over.
Well, that's after you stopped a robbery, or at least pursued the robber there, and you took quite a bit of damage on that arm, if I recall.
Yeah, it was pretty bad because it lacerated both the bicep and the tricep, and they had to sort of reconstitute those muscles together, and then there was damage to one of the major blood vessels into the arm. There was some nerve damage, and then the infection that ensued for about 20 days. So it was. Yeah, it wasn't pleasant. But you know, it's one of those things. Like I said, you never expect what you're going to do with your life, and I'm sure your listeners experience that. You don't know where you're going to be in 5 years or what you're going to be doing. You don't know what the life's changes or vicissitudes will visit on you. So I tried to make the best of it. So I stayed at BYU. They were very kind to me, and I was able to graduate from there.
Well, now something that I found surprising and actually very interesting was that not only were you at BYU, but you were recruited from BYU for the FBI.
Yeah, that was really unusual too, because usually you apply to the FBI, and in my case, I received a phone call one day, and I thought it was a prank. Back then pranks were a little bit kinder than maybe they are today at university. Yes. And I thought it was just somebody in the halls pulling a prank. But then the next day, two suits showed up, and they looked serious as a heart attack, and they handed me an envelope. Which I still have. I kept that envelope. I wanted their fingerprints all over it, and I don't think I've ever told anybody that story. So there's a new one. They said, we'd really like for you to apply to become an agent. I was so I received that envelope. I was 22 years old. The recruitment age for the bureau was you had to be 23, but there was a year hiring freeze. So and so I was one of the youngest agents ever hired by the bureau.
That's awesome. And like you just said, I'd never heard of the FBI recruiting. But on a side note, I'm not sure what's going on, but my son just graduated from Texas A&M. And he went in to pursue a degree in physics. He then moved to engineering, and finally he ended up with his degree in linguistics, focusing on Russian. So, of course, I instantly think, I've given birth to the next Raymond Reddington. I'm not sure what's going on here. So, but it's kind of interesting. So,
once again, you just never know. But I can imagine somebody with your son's talents, the NSA has probably a job waiting for him.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine anything else, and that's all he's told me is he's waiting on a job. But I don't know what he's doing. So kids these days.
Yeah,
but he went to Russia for a year to complete his Russian accent and to make sure that he's very, very what's the word? I just lost it. He's proficient in the language. If somebody speaks it, what is the word?
Yeah, proficient. Yeah,
that's that word. Fluent, I think, is what I was going for. He's fluent in Russian. So,
yeah.
There you go.
Well, there's nothing like proficiency by immersing yourself. So, very much so.
Yeah, it's very interesting to me personally. But hey, one of the reasons I asked you on was one of your books called Dangerous Personalities. And
sure.
I'm unintentionally running somewhat of a series on safety. This week's episode featured Dr. David Perrodin. He's a safety specialist, and he specializes in school safety. And he's done a very, very thorough investigation of Sandy Hook. He's also got a new book coming out, which is Lessons from Lower Manhattan, where he talks about the rescue of 500,000 people on 9/11 within like 9 hours. So it just kind of fits. Everything has a bit of a safety theme these days. And your Dangerous Personalities really kind of jumped out at me. And I got to looking at it and doing a little research, and we're talking about 4 different types of personalities that we can run into and we have to deal with almost on a daily basis. But a lot of times, too, people aren't real open to recognizing danger before it even happens. We walk around with our heads down in our phones, or we're distracted by the latest fidget spinner, or whatever it may be. I was hoping that you and I could talk a little bit more about those 4 different types of personalities and what we can do to be more aware of our surroundings other than getting our heads out of our phones and be able to recognize when maybe we're in danger.
Yeah. No, I'm happy to. The book Dangerous Personalities, which came out in 2004, was actually the first book that I wanted to write when I left the Bureau, but incredibly, I couldn't find anybody that was interested in it. And I had to build on the successes of the other books, such as the ones that, What Everybody Is Saying, to build on that reputation to then allow me to write that book, because I thought that all the things that I had learned in the Bureau would be beneficial to the reader, to the public. I mean, what utility is it if I'm the one that knows this stuff, but I don't share it with anybody? I'm glad you're mentioning that book, because I think of everything that I've written. I've written, I think, 12 books now. To me, that was the most significant, and I have to say, it's the one that I have received the most email from around the world, from people who have said that the book either helped them to validate what they had experienced or were living, or in some cases, and it's very humbling. And I have just hundreds and hundreds of these emails where it actually saved their lives. So I'm happy to talk about it, because it's a topic that, as a parent, is obviously important to me.
Sure. I mean, you'd hate for your child to get involved in a relationship where one of these dangerous personalities was at the forefront of their partner.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things that I should say as a predicate is how I came up with the four personality types. And I have to go back to my time in the FBI, both doing criminal profiling and then in the Bureau's National Security Behavioral Program. One of the things that we started to see, or I started to see, a trend, it was, well, who is it that we're seeing over and over again? You know, we read about somebody that does this or does that, and how does that compare to what we call the average person or normal? And what I started to see, what we were seeing was, over and over, the people that were causing the most problems, either through criminal activity or by creating chaos, either in the workplace or at home. Basically, we had it down to four major personality types, and these were the ones that seemed to be causing most of the problems. And so that's why I focused on only four. And so I thought I should bring that forward from the beginning.
Now, I'd like to think that although you isolated it to four, there would be inherent subcategories or sub demonstrations of other aspects of the personalities, whether you have a narcissist that's also a predator, or a paranoid predator, or something along those lines.
Sure. I mean, Larry, you're exactly right. I mean, you nailed it. You can have, you often see, for instance, a crossover where you have a very narcissistic individual who also just has the traits of the psychopath. And we saw this with the serial killer Ted Bundy, who was just cold as a reptile, but this high sense of entitlement and so forth. And also keeping in mind that all of these typologies, let's say, fall on a spectrum. So some are It's like people we know. Some are more obnoxious than others. Some are more intense than others, and it sort of varies and then flows back and forth. So it's also on a spectrum.
So, could you give us just a high level definition of each of the four, and maybe some of the core components to each that we could look for in our everyday lives? You know, a lot of the times when we encounter these types of personalities, it's not just in a relationship status. It's in just everyday life. You're walking through the Walmart parking lot. You may find the predator. You may have a relationship with someone that's the narcissist. So many people I know have been in relationships with an unstable personality. Could you, again, give us a high-level overview of each and maybe some of the key points that we could look for out of each?
So let's start with the emotionally unstable, because you run into this. You certainly see it a lot, for instance, on television in shows such as reality shows. They almost, the housewives of XXX, or any of these shows and cities and so forth. And even in the show like the Bachelor or the Bachelorette and so forth, invariably, you have 17, 20 people, and yet you have these individuals that show up that are just emotionally unstable. And the characteristics that we often see are that emotionally they're just supercharged. So they react violently, or they react outrageously to just small events. So their reactions are off kilter from whatever offense or whatever took place. But oftentimes we miss. So we see their reaction, but what we miss is how on edge they make people, how they make you feel insecure, that there's always anxiety every time people get together, that the more virulent of these individuals, the more toxic of these individuals, often are very critical of others, that they have a capacity to verbally abuse others, or they may throw things or become suddenly violent and so forth. And they value you 1 minute, but then they devalue you the next. And whatever history you have with these individuals doesn't seem to matter. They can turn on you in an instant. And people who live with people like this, you wake up where the whole family is asking, how are they doing today? Are they in a good mood or in a bad mood?
Sure.
Very, very destabilizing in the workplace and in the home. And the danger from these individuals is, as I note in the book, Dangerous Personalities, is the danger that they victimize either psychologically, physically, emotionally, sometimes financially, and sometimes it's it has to do with their own health. So that's the problem with the emotionally unstable. And I've received probably in excess of 100 letters from individuals who have been either married to one or worked with one of these personalities. And they cause a lot of psychological distress, but a lot of them had to go and get therapy for themselves just because they worked with them. A small anecdote here. I had a CEO from a small company tell me that for years he had an employee that was like this, and not only dominated his management time, but really caused a lot of friction with the other employees. And finally, they were able to somehow get this person to leave, and it was like the company changed completely. So it's one of those personalities that's out there. But the reason that most people aren't sure of it is because in the psychological literature, you often see it described, for instance, as someone who is a borderline personality, or maybe histrionic, or any number of descriptors that the clinician is familiar with, but the average person is not familiar with.
Yeah, and unstable personality, I mean, that speaks to everyone. You can definitely relate to that. And, you mentioned one in a workplace there. I've experienced that myself. I'm a 20-year a career IT guy. And, I've seen many people come and go, and I've definitely encountered unstable personalities throughout that time.
Yeah, and one of the things that we were looking at is, do we see these individuals in workplace violence? And not only do we see these individuals often filing lawsuits, but also where they become very very violent, and therein is one of the dangers. The other one that I think we're most familiar with is predatory behavior, and I defined the predator as just people who take advantage of others. So you hear terms that often not everybody understands. I get this question all the time: what's the difference between sociopathy and psychopathy and so forth, and antisocial personality disorder? So rather than use those very specific terms, what I decided to use was the term that I think most people would understand, is that there are predators that live amongst us. And sometimes the predator may manifest as someone who is habitually leeching off of others to the point where they're draining your bank account. But they're very irresponsible to the extreme end, where they are causing physical harm to others. Predatory behavior spans everything from child abuse to monetary abuse and abuse of the elderly, and as well as sexual abuse. And for the majority of people that we see in prison, probably fall into that category of predation, and that's why oftentimes we see a high recidivism rate. It's just that these individuals, who are by definition severely flawed of character, this is the lifestyle they have chosen, and they have no regrets. They have no remorse. They seem to sleep well at night, even though they make life miserable for other people. And so I think we have to acknowledge that there are people out there. I've certainly interviewed hundreds of individuals like this. The average police officer runs into a lot of these people. And so when you hear of a grandmother who was talked out of her money, when you hear of, Bernie Madoff, who, was scheming in a pyramid scheme to take people's money and so forth. And, they seem to just not be bothered by it. Therein is your predator. And there's so many kinds of predation, whether, as you know, I write in the book about, these all these priests that were taking advantage of children, and so let's call them what they were doing. They were predators.
Sure.
And they were using religion, and they were using the vestments of the office of a priest to mask what they really were. And I'm very much about calling people exactly what they are. And if you're a criminal and if you're an abuser, then that's exactly what you are. And as I think about predation, you were talking about how to keep ourselves safe. One thing I learned in looking at behavior, criminal behavior, is that the average person doesn't think about what and rightfully so. They don't think like how a predator thinks. How many times, Larry, have you heard the question, why did he do that?
Oh, sure.
Right. And that's actually the wrong question, because a predator, the answer to why did he do that is because he can. And that to the average person is shocking. What do you mean he can? Yeah, if that's what he wanted to do today, that's what he'll do, or she will do. And trying to find some higher cause here, you forget, this is how they think. I remember interviewing one years ago. I mean, this was going back to the 80s. That's how old I am. And I was interviewing this guy, and I asked him, because as you know, I'm basically a paid observer, and I said, when you look at people, what do you look for? And he says, exploitable weaknesses. I said, well, what do you mean? I look how they walk out of the store. This is before cell phones. Look how they walk out of the stores. They're walking towards their car, but they're still looking inside their shopping bags. That means they don't know what's going on around them. They park right next to a van, not realizing that when you park right there and there's a van next to you, that 180 degrees are being covered. And so no one on that side can see you, that you could be pulled into a van. And he's going through this list, and he's going through things that, as an FBI agent, I had never thought about. And yet, this is exactly how they view the world. He says, I look at men and I think, can this guy take care of himself, or is he walking like a wimp? I look at a woman and I said, does she look like, she's going to fight me, or is she going to just do whatever I say? And, it just made me think about how distracted we now are 30 years after those interviews. When I see young women getting in the car in the parking lot, and they're still talking on their phone, and they have no idea what's around them, that really frightens me.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say the same thing, and I used to teach rape prevention. I haven't done it in several years, but I'm a lifelong martial artist, and we would have these seminars for the women, and that was one of the main points of the 2-hour seminar. It was walk with your chest high, your head high, be aware of what's going on around you. Look.
You're exactly right. You have to have situational awareness.
Exactly.
You have to also talk to yourself and say, if you see someone who is vectoring in such a way, they're walking in such a way that at some future point, this person and I will be at the same spot, I have to do something about that. I either have to change my pace, or I have to make sure that individual knows that I'm looking at them.
Right.
That I'm making eye contact with them. But what I will not do is get in that elevator when I don't feel comfortable, or walk in the same way. We had an FBI, a female agent in New York. She was walking towards her parked car, and this individual was tracking her from across the street, and she kept looking at him. the guy did not resist. He finally confronted her with a weapon, and of course she confronted him back.
Right.
But it was one of these things where this predator wanted her, and nothing was going to stop him. So I think we also have to have that responsibility. And one of the things that I teach, whoever asks, not just young women, is that you need to learn how to say, stop right there, don't come any closer. And, that's done with the arm extended, with the fingers really wide, not with the fingers together. And it's in a low, lower pitch, making sure that they can hear it and say, stop right there. Don't get any closer. And if that means you don't let people get closer than 20 feet, that's your prerogative.
Sure.
That is absolutely your prerogative. What I find is people say no when the person is now 2 feet away, 3 feet away. I saw this recently at a food store. Somebody was going around panhandling, and what they were waiting for the person to get either to the door of the car or getting in the car. That's too late. As soon as you see someone doing that sort of thing, 20 feet out, you say, stop right there. Do not get any closer. And feel no apology for that whatsoever. As you know, the last line in the book, Dangerous Personality, is we have no social obligation ever to be victimized.
Sure.
And if that offends someone, I'm sorry. That's the way it is. But I'm not going to get into an elevator with a bunch of drunk college students where I don't feel comfortable.
Yeah, even as a man, you don't want to do that.
No,
if the numbers are not in your favor, I'm 44 now and I'm not quite the scrapper I once was, so I'll take into account what's going on and who is it going on with, and I'll analyze the situation and determine whether or not I want to get on that elevator.
Yeah, exactly, and that's happened to me. I've been at resorts where the next day I'm giving a speech, but all of a sudden here's 8-9 guys. They're in an elevator. They've been drinking. Some of them are they've been tussling with each other. I just don't want to be in there. And if they take offense that I don't get in there, so be it. So one of the things that I often teach, whether it's men or women, is if you're alone and you're maybe in a public place, but there aren't a lot of people around. When you summon that elevator, don't stand too close to the elevator. Take a few steps back, and once that door opens and it's safe. And you feel it's safe, then step in. It's often too tempting to just walk right in, or you could be pulled into an elevator. So I always say, summon the elevator, take a few steps back, make that decision, and don't worry about making apologies to anyone.
No, and just for reference, my number is 5. So if I see 5 or less, then, I'll get on the elevator. But if it's 6 or above, then I won't get on the elevator. I figure I can still take 4 or 5 of those college students. So,
well, you don't have as much arthritis as I do. When you hear about older people being just punched in the face because it's somebody has taken on a dare. These kinds of assaults, you just have to really be very careful. And I'm not suggesting you don't enjoy life. I enjoy life, but I'm also careful about what's around me.
Yeah, there's definitely a big difference between being paranoid and having situational awareness. So
yeah, the other one that. And this is a term we hear nowadays almost every day or every hour, and that's the narcissistic personality. And the narcissistic personality, as I described in Dangerous Personalities, is dangerous because they overvalue themselves at the expense of devaluing others. And think about that for a minute. So it's not just what we often think of narcissism as someone who likes to look in the mirror or preen or dress up or any number of things that we associate with narcissism. It is objectionable behavior in that this person thinks of themselves as so special that they devalue others. And in doing so, they make life miserable because they think that they need to be treated as special. They want to be adored, but then they don't return the adoration. They want to be respected and treasured, but if you don't respect them or treasure them, then they come after you very negatively. And, you know, when you are married to somebody like this, and the hundreds of letters, this one is probably the most that I've gotten, is that you never feel like you're an equal. You always feel like you're somebody's chew toy, that they have the right to mistreat you, that they have the right to talk, they have the right to demean you and so forth. And they're not bothered by what they do. And we've all worked for somebody that has narcissistic traits, and they make us feel worthless. And of course it's on a continuum. Some are worse than others, but the you know, one of the prevailing problems in the world is we have individuals who attain positions of power, whether it's law enforcement or the priesthood or teachers, and they have these narcissistic traits, and they're pathological. And then the last one is the least recognized, but the one that I think causes a lot of harm. And that's the paranoid personality. And these individuals are dangerous because they view the world with danger. They view the world where everything needs to be questioned, everything needs to be challenged. A lot of times they have no joy in their life. And these individuals always see harm in everything they observe. They see two people talking. Oh, they must be talking about me. Every decision. These are the people that at work, every time somebody gets promoted, they think there's this cabal, that it's all done with the intent of keeping them down. The problem with these individuals is if you're married to them, they make your life hell. They question why you took 2 extra minutes to go to the store to go shopping. They question all your friends. They eventually drive you to have no friends. And at work, a lot of times what we often see with workplace violence is in fact because of the paranoid ideation personality. So that's why I wrote about those 4, because I felt the American public needed to hear about it, but not with the terms that a clinician would use, which are often very confusing to the average person.
Sure, and that's one of the things that I really like about your books. You know, when I first picked them up, I thought for sure with the credentials that you have and the background that you have and obviously the intellect that you have, I was going to read these and I was going to do exactly that. I was just going to lock up because the terminology was going to be so far beyond the average individual's comprehension. Anybody can read your books. They read very, very easily. They read very quickly. I think the average read time for your latest book, which we haven't touched on yet, and I know we're running short on time here, but it was like 6 hours, you know, and I believe it could be done in less, personally. But
well, that's a very nice compliment coming from you, Larry. I really appreciate that because, you know, I wrote what everybody is saying in a way that I wish I had been taught about body language, not in the way that clinicians write about it. I mean, if you ask the average person, what's an adapter? I don't know. Is it something you plug into the wall? But an adapter is, or an adaptive behavior is what your mom taught me, and that is, it's a pacifier. We do behaviors that pacify us. And so why complicate it? Why call it an adaptive behavior? Just simplify it so that the average person can understand it. And that's what I did. And with the book 3 Minutes to Doomsday, which I hope your listeners, if they're interested in the FBI, if they're interested in espionage, if they're interested in how we conduct espionage investigations or interviewing, as you know, a lot of the book has to do with interviewing.
Sure.
I wrote it in a way that, without a lot of the nomenclature, so that people can understand. So this is what's meant by espionage tradecraft. This is how you practice your profession, so that you do it professionally, but you're not caught or whatever. And so that's what I always try to do. And maybe it's because I went to public schools in Miami. I don't know. But the simpler it is, the better.
Yeah, I even found myself at times, please don't be insulted by this, I found myself at times going, is this a novel? Or is this being written by an actual FBI agent? It reads that well, and that's why I say don't be insulted by it. It reads that easily for your average reader, and I think a lot of people would really, really, really enjoy it. Whether you're looking at the FBI craft or whether you're looking, what is it like to be a special agent, that sort of thing. It really doesn't matter the approach. It's just it's a great book.
Well, I thank you for that. It was. I still find writing very difficult, transitioning from FBI writing to writing for the public. Nobody wants to read something that says on or about December, I observe. So I'm getting better at it. I'm nowhere near where I would like to be, but it's always gratifying when someone, especially like yourself, enjoys what I do.
So do you want to give us just a real quick synopsis of the 3 Minutes to Doomsday? I did do a Facebook Live video before we came on here today and let people know about it. And also, I would highly recommend, after your synopsis and after folks listen to this episode, to go to YouTube. And I found a very easy-to-find lecture that you were giving that was an overview of 3 Minutes to Doomsday. I believe it's a little over an hour long, and it was phenomenal.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, they can go to YouTube. I gave a presentation after the book came out at the Spy Museum in Washington, a place I highly recommend to visit if you're in the D.C. area. But it's a true spy story. It's about a case that I stumbled onto, all because the agent that was going to be assigned the case was out of town, and so I go out on this interview of what was supposed to be a witness. But as I'm talking to this individual, his name was Rod Ramsey, his cigarette was shaking in his hand every time I mentioned the name of an individual named Clyde Conrad, who had been arrested in Germany. And that shaking cigarette, which nobody else apparently had seemed to notice, it gave me a clue or a hint, or it was a tell that something unusual is here. Why would the name of someone that's been arrested cause somebody else to shake with nervous tension? And so that started a series of interviews. And in the end, there were 42 interviews that revealed one of the largest espionage rings in the history of the United States. And what it also revealed, that at one point they had compromised so much material dealing with the defense of both the United States and Western Europe, that, as General Otis said in his testimony to the court, that had hostilities broken out, the defeat of the West would have been assured. And that appears nowhere, Larry, in American history in any other case. And so I felt that the American public should know about this case, what happened, how close we were to Doomsday, all because of the treachery of these individuals. And that's what the book is about. And so if you're interested in espionage, tradecraft, the FBI, 3 Minutes to Doomsday is the book for you.
Well, Mr. Navarro, I'll definitely have all the links to your book, either on Amazon or to your website. Are there any other particular places folks can pick up your book?
Most of the larger bookstores have them. They can certainly order them for you. I always encourage people to visit their local bookstore to keep these folks in the game. It's available as an ebook. It's available as an audiobook, and I hope they would enjoy it.
I have no doubt that they will. Once again, it's 3 Minutes to Doomsday by Mr. Joe Navarro. And Mr. Navarro, I want to take this opportunity to say thank you very much for your time today. Before we wrap this up, is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience? Any little quote or tidbit of knowledge that they can take away?
I would say, Larry, that you serve a public service, and that is to educate. And I would encourage anyone that if you can help someone to be safer, be stronger, be smarter, be wiser, then share that knowledge.
Well, I'll definitely continue in my efforts to do just that. Once again, Mr. Navarro, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And hopefully we can talk again sometime down the road, maybe get into some more specifics on maybe these dangerous personalities or one of your next books that you have upcoming.
Well, I look forward to that, Larry.
All righty. Thank you very much.
All the best.
Take care.